The Edifice of Trust broadcast is a thoughtful discussion of today's current events from the perspective of America's founding principles. Welcome. From heart-pumping music to head-thumping commentary. On August 5th, 2019, at around 7 o'clock in the morning, President Donald Trump tweeted on @RealDonaldTrump, China dropped the price of their currency to an almost a historic low. It's called currency manipulation. Are you listening, Federal Reserve? This is a major violation that will greatly weaken China over time. When I first heard of this tweet on television earlier this week, I laughed. Within the character limitations of the Twitterverse, President Trump not only accused China of currency manipulation, he also pressured the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates in order to weaken the dollar. Which is, let me think, currency manipulation. Let's face it, the president appears to have a very shallow understanding of economics and foreign trade, and their impact on U.S. foreign policy. In his tweets and campaign rally comments, he presents a worldview that is a zero-sum game. He rejects the possibility of a win-win scenario. He says he wants to have fair trade, but what he really wants is a zero trade deficit. Unfortunately, economic reality trips him up. Much of the trade deficit he is so upset about is due to the large and persistent budget deficit of the federal government. Here is a chart that uses data from the U.S. Census Bureau that shows the U.S. trade deficit from 1960 until 2018. And here is a second chart that uses data from the White House website and which shows the budget deficit also from 1960 until 2018. You can see that the two charts track each other very closely. The trade deficit was a minor problem until the 1970s when it started to grow larger. This was also when the U.S. budget deficits grew larger. As budget deficits grew, so did trade deficits. This is not a coincidence. As we buy imported goods, we must ship dollars overseas. Most countries cannot pay for a lot of imports with their domestic currency. Foreigners don't want to hold that currency and so sell the unwanted currencies, and as we all know, when supply exceeds demand, the price goes down. As their currency devalues, imported goods and services become more expensive, blunting demand until the supply of that currency in the market is reduced as purchases decline and trade flows adjust to a new equilibrium. But the United States is different. Our currency is the world's reserve currency, so foreigners don't mind holding dollars. Instead, they hold on to the dollars we give them and invest that money in U.S. assets, such as the Treasury bonds needed to fund our deficits. There are other factors that affect this equation, such as the euro-dollar market, where foreigners keep their dollars overseas and put them in foreign banks that lend that money out in the form of dollar-denominated loans. But generally, this formula holds true. For this reason, it is very unlikely that President Trump will be able to get the trade deficit down anywhere near to zero. In fact, since he came into office, the trade deficit has increased despite all his efforts. And it is unlikely to improve very much as long as he continues excessive government spending, which is expected to create a $1 trillion deficit in the next fiscal year. Despite this grim reality, and also despite the opposition of most of his closest advisors, according to a Wall Street Journal article, President Trump is doubling down on the looming trade war with China, slapping tariffs on an additional $300 million in Chinese exports. China has retaliated by devaluing its currency to keep its exports competitive, the move which triggered the early morning Twitter outburst. All the uncertainty created by fears of a trade war with China is undoing the beneficial effects of the Trump tax cuts and his deregulation of President Obama's overly stringent grip on business. But for businessmen, it has been a case of trading the devil you know for a devil that you don't. No one knows how this will turn out. As a nationalist populist, President Trump has fallen into the same error as all the progressive populists clambering the crowded stage to be the next populist in chief. He focuses on outcomes and not the causes of the outcomes, and he is now reaping the unintended consequences of ignoring those causes. I've seen this all before. When I first started working in Latin America, the whole continent was under the sway of what we called import substitution economic systems. These economic systems featured high tariff and non-tariff barriers to promote domestic industries and safeguard domestic employment, especially in manufacturing. Exactly the system President Trump seems to favor for the United States. These countries also featured crony capitalism, rampant corruption, shoddy domestic products, and extensive smuggling. They also featured excessively strong currencies, protected by the high tariff barriers, capital flight, and foreign borrowing to make up for the missing domestic capital. Only Chile, under Pinochet, was making any economic reforms, thanks to the help of the Chicago Boys, a group of economists trained at the University of Chicago under the tutelage of Milton Friedman. But the house of cards that was import substitution countries was about to fall. Reviewing the credit files of my employer in Mexico, the credit officers assured me that our clients were sound and that the dollar-denominated loans that we had lent them were safe. They pointed out that while the exchange rate for the Mexican peso was about 20 to the dollar, they had done sensitivity analyses of exchange rates all the way to 75 to 1, and our clients could still repay our loans. During my visits to Mexico in 1982, the peso went to 45, then 70, and by the end of the year, 150 to 1. Our clients were all broke. Mexico collapsed in 1982 and created a cascade of failed economies across the continent and around the world. The 1980s are known as the lost decade, or década perdida, in Latin America because of the economic hardship most countries endured. Import substitution is a mercantilist economic system that goes hand in hand with populist authoritarianism. During the década perdida, dictatorships in Argentina and Brazil fell as economic conditions provoked civil unrest that even the authoritarian boot of dictatorship could not contain. Somehow, the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or PRI, in Mexico managed to hang on until the year 2000. State capitalism is a form of mercantilism practiced in China, and which is credited for spurring the rapid growth of that country from a poverty-stricken basket case to a formidable world power. But much of that growth has been behind high tariff barriers and heavily subsidized state-owned companies run by party hacks or military officers and funded by loans from state-owned banks. Bitcoin was very popular in China as a means for capital flight until the government cracked down on the cryptocurrency recently. Is this the model that President Trump wants for the United States? Although the United States had a mercantilist economic policy soon after it was founded, as did all the other countries in the world at that time, it was the free market policies that the United States developed that have made it the prosperous nation it is now. And the American people are still relatively free. But that might change if the populists of the left or the right have their way. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.